right, let's get going here. So the first question, ooh, this is interesting. So a person wants me to talk about AP seminar and AP research. Okay, are they worth taking? Is it easy? I heard that's a group or team project. Is that true? Well, first of all, let me kind of distinguish between the two classes. So you can think of AP seminar as more of the preparation for AP research, right? So it teaches you how to look at, let's say, different topics that you need to research on from a very like multidisciplinary angle. And those classes may have some group work involved. But for the AP research part, it's usually the student's own research project, right? So they would have a faculty member at their high school as an advisor or mentor for the paper, and they would actually write a research paper in the same way that you would an undergraduate research paper, right? So it is oftentimes fairly rigorous. I don't necessarily consider them some of the easier APs. In fact, I think I looked around about this like a couple of months ago, and I found that it's actually got one of the lower percentages of people getting fives. I would say like AP seminar only really has about like a 9 or 10% rate of people getting fives. And for AP research, it's only about 12%. Now, in contrast, you would think that certain subjects, for instance, like AP Calculus BC, there are actually way more people getting fives on that, right? So I would say, yeah, it's a little more challenging. I think it's usually better for people who have more experience doing things like, research papers. So someone who's going to be a strong writer would tend to do better for this rather than someone who, let's say, for example, is more, quantitative or more STEM oriented, because a lot of the research that you have to do or a lot of the tasks that you have to do for the research paper involve having very strong writing skills, academic writing skills. Okay. But is it worth it? Absolutely. I would say it's more valuable, though, for students who are going to be going to the pathway of maybe social sciences, um, or the type of research paper writing that they would do there would be a little bit more valuable, but it's still nonetheless important even for STEM majors. Okay, if it's available at your high school. It's not actually available in all high schools. Next is, what are the recommended summer programs that is best for political science? Also, is it easier to go to a prestigious college with this major? So first of all, let me answer the second question first. Is it easier? Not necessarily, not based on the data I've seen. And it's largely because political science for many years has been considered sort of like the go-to major for anybody who's going pre-law. And as you can well imagine, there are quite a few students who would want to go pre-law. So political science can be also fairly competitive, right? So I would say no, like if you were to look at a spectrum of like social science subjects, I think it might actually be easier to get into certain schools with like maybe like a sociology or anthropology major, which are also in the social sciences category, than political science, right? Now, as far as summer programs go, a couple that come to mind, I don't have a list in front of me, obviously, but I would say Yale has an outstanding program called Yale Young Global Scholars, which traditionally has a really outstanding program for politics, philosophy, and economics, or PLE, I think is what it's called, politics, law, and economics, right? So I think that's an outstanding program. I also think that certain programs like Georgetown has some outstanding programs for foreign policy. So it's basically like poli-sci, except from more international perspectives. So like IR, basically, right? Other than that, like you could look into the pre-college programs of a lot of top colleges, especially those that are known for social sciences, like U Chicago, Columbia, for example, and then just take courses in political science. I think that would probably be your best bet, or potentially do research. I think those are your best bets to be able to do a summer program that's competitive for poli-sci specifically. Okay, so the next question here is it easy to transfer to business major in sophomore or junior year within an undergraduate school? I would say it really vastly depends on the undergraduate program. So the more competitive the school is for their undergraduate business program, of course, the harder it's going to be, right? So I would say like if you're looking at schools like NYU or USC, for example, or even like UT Austin for its Macomb School of Business, it's probably going to be very difficult for you to transfer into business because their business program relative to the rest of the college has a much higher level of rigor and a lower acceptance rate. So trying to get in as a transfer student would even be harder, potentially, because there are fewer spots available, right? So I would say probably not. But if you're talking about a college where they're not necessarily very known or reputable for business relative to the rest of their programs, then of course that would give you an easier pathway. Okay, next is, with the potential policy change to DEI programs, when a student writes an essay, is it still recommended to write about Diversity related topics. Obviously, that's a big question that we don't know quite the answer to because the prompts won't be available until August 1st, right? So, for many of the supplemental essays for colleges. So, obviously, you could still write about diversity in your personal statement because those prompts are not changing and you could really just write about anything. So, if diversity is a factor that can make you stand out, not necessarily just to check off the box that says you're a certain race, but if it makes you stand out relative to the rest of the applicant pool, then of course it's in your best interest to write about it. Just because, like, even if it's not necessarily because they're trying to recruit you for diversity purposes, if it sets you apart from the applicant pool, anything that sets you apart and makes you stand out and not necessarily sort of like blend into the crowd will always be to your benefit one way or another. Now, as it regards to the prompts, now, if the prompts are still there, then of course students will need to write about aspects of their background and lived experience that makes them diverse, but it doesn't have to be ethnic. It doesn't have to be cultural or racial, right? So other factors can make you stand out and add to the diversity of the actual applicant pool. It could be your passion for volunteering. It could be your commitment to environmental issues, or it could be like you're just really quirky in terms of your interest in your majors and you like love studying different languages, right? So that can add to the diversity. It does not have to be a DEI related thing. So I would say yes, largely because you do want to stand out, and no necessarily to like you would just want to write about diversity for diversity's sake, right? So if it doesn't fit your strengths, then you don't want to do that. So lean into your strengths, find aspects of your background and find aspects in terms of your profile that can make you stand out. So in that regard, you still want to write about things that make you stand out. Okay. Next is, what kinds of research projects can a student who loves math do? It's an interesting one because if you're thinking about pure math and research, sad to say there's not a lot. And it, of course, makes sense, right? Because college professors wouldn't really trust a high school student to have the level of math required to actually aid them in what they do in terms of research, because the nature of math research in college is very different, right? It's about tackling very, very complex math equations or problems. It's not necessarily lab based in the sense that a bio lab or a chem lab would have it, or even like an engineering lab. So there's not as much utility in terms of what a high school student can offer. Because let's face it, even the most advanced high school student for math is going to be taking what, maybe like linear algebra or like multivariable calculus. Even that's not enough because that's really just considered the rudimentary math classes for an undergraduate. So there's not really much they can contribute in a pure math sense. I mean, to be honest, same thing goes for computer science. There's not a lot of pure computer science summer research programs. So the best bet is to utilize those skills in ways that other fields can benefit from. So I would say if they really love math, they can focus more on like quantitative analysis and do like statistics, data analysis stuff. A lot of other fields will have a use for a student who is very, very good at sort of like processing data and crunching numbers in that sense, right? So you could, be a research intern for astronomy or for like business and finance, right? There are fields that could utilize someone who has very strong quantitative abilities and be able to utilize them in their programs, be it for like summer research or even maybe during the school year. So I would say that would be your best bet rather than looking for a pure math summer research. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean there aren't opportunities for you to do things during the summer. MIT on their webpage has a recommended list of summer programs specifically for math students. There are programs like the Ross program in Ohio State or the Promise program in BU. Stanford has a program called SUMAC where it focuses on training students to do much more kind of like number theory and heavy duty, more advanced math than you would cover in high school. So those would be the directions I would look at because, I mean, even MIT recommends that, right, for people who are going for math. So that's probably honestly your best bet. Okay. Next is, I heard that A through G graduation requirements indicate that 2 years of science learning have to be 1 year in physical science and 1 year in life science. Is that true? No, that's not explicitly what the UC requirements say. So the UCs require you in terms of their D requirement, which is the science requirement, to have 2 years required, 3 recommended, and they recommend that you have 2 years out of the 3. So there's biochem physics. It doesn't have to be AP. As long as you have 2 years out of that biochem or physics, you should be fine. I doubt if your high school will allow you to take like AP bio without at least regular bio or at least regular chem. So if you took regular bio and regular chem, and then you took AP bio and AP environmental science senior year, you should be more than good. Okay. You should have covered all the bases. You do not need to have taken physics, right? So just think of it, biochem physics in your 4 years of high school, you just needed to have at least bare minimum taken 2 of those. Okay, I guess next is a question for Vicky about slides. I do know that we make these available in our YouTube channel, so you could probably just watch those there and get the information from the slides that way. Next is, what is my opinion on Olin College? Which is better, USC or Olin? They're very different, right? So Olin is a very specialty liberal arts college that focuses on engineering, obviously, right? So one of the key things that you'd want to figure out is, like USC definitely will give you way more research opportunities, the chance to kind of like work with professors in their field. So, whereas Olin is more specialized towards undergraduate engineering. So, it depends on what your interests are, right? So, if you're more aligned towards research, then obviously USC would be a better fit potentially. Um, I would say Olin would be good for like a broad-based on education and engineering. If you have grad school aspirations, I guess like the smaller setting of Olin would maybe give you like a closer relationship with your professors. That could maybe potentially even out if you're not necessarily as much into research. They're both good schools. I would say definitely then it really depends on what you envision your undergraduate education to look like. But I would say like, hey, if you went to either one, can you still access like a top 10 engineering like a graduate program or a PhD program? Absolutely, right? So they'd be more or less kind of like in similar footing. Next is, how do I prove that I'm first generation university in the Common App? I mean, largely that's what you put based on what the parent information, right? There's a section where you would put down your information in terms of like how far of an education that you received. Do they verify that independently? Probably not. But then again, like most aspects of your application. If you lie on that and you get caught, they could rescind your application or your admissions offer. So I wouldn't mess with that, right? So, but if you're legitimately a first generation student, then sure, like you can definitely go ahead and kind of put those down. Okay. Next is, for a student who wants math as a major, how important is AP chemistry, given that a student already took bio, honors chem, AP physics, and physics C? I mean, you already have 4 years of science, so I would say not very necessary technically. I would say definitely maybe even just use up that time to go ahead and take an even more advanced math class outside of school, right? So instead of like having the extra homework with AP Chem, I think that would make much more sense for you to go ahead and take like multivariable calculus or linear algebra elsewhere, like at a local community college or something, or at a pre-college. Okay, great questions, definitely thought-provoking all around. Yeah, so thanks so much. Yes, I'll see you all next week, I guess. All right. Take care, everybody.